Where we last left off, the United States and Britain had joined the war effort together now, and they planned their first attacks, their first coordinated attacks in North Africa in order to get to that soft underbelly of Europe. Why is North Africa such a better option than going through northern France in 1942? Let's find a new friend. Here we go.
There's a wall.
Is there a literal wall?
Didn't they make like fortifications?
Very good. There's a line of fortification that's called the Atlantic Wall. There is not a literal wall constructed hundreds of miles along the Atlantic coast, but there are literal fortifications and machine gun nests and pillboxes and heavy artillery and such that can stop an impending invasion. So it would be very difficult to get in there. And by 1942, once the United States is actually putting boots on the ground in Europe, by 1942, Germany's had a couple years to build that Atlantic Wall up. All right? So Winston Churchill calls Italy in southern Europe the soft underbelly of Europe. They see North Africa as an easier entry point. But this is not making everybody happy, and I want to talk about this for a moment. We have in 1941, well, in June of 1941, the Soviet Union being invaded by Nazi Germany. By December of 1941, we have the United States being attacked at Pearl Harbor. So 1941 marks the creation of what's known as the Grand Alliance, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. They are a military alliance now, but they are not necessarily friends. The United States and Britain were pretty cool with each other. We know Winston Churchill and Roosevelt have been talking for a while now. But Stalin, especially, and Churchill, they don't see eye to eye on much. Stalin wants nothing more from anybody than for the Allies to open up a true Western front, just like we had in World War I. He wants a Western front to be opened up in France, because that is the only thing that Stalin believes will relieve the pressure that his armies are suffering under in the East. If a true Western front were opened up, Germany would have to send some of those troops in the Soviet Union back across the continent to France to defend. Stalin doesn't think, and he's right, that attacking in Italy is going to cause much of a diversion for the Nazis. Because even though Italy, and we can take a look at it here, even though Italy can look like an access point into Central Europe, what's going on right up in here?
Mountains.
You've got some mountains. What do we call those mountains?
Alps.
The Alps, very good. Pyrenees between Spain and France. So you've got some mountains to get across. This is not a flat plain that you can just march millions of troops or hundreds of thousands of troops through. So Adolf Hitler doesn't have to be as concerned about an Italian invasion or an attack coming from Italy as he would maybe some future attack coming from France. So Stalin needs the Allies to open up a Western front. But the Allies aren't opening up a Western front yet. They go to North Africa first. Right? In 1942, they go to North Africa first. And now Stalin is angry. And we need to remember this. And this is maybe something that couldn't be talked about as much. Maybe when your parents had history, or your grandparents had a history class that covered World War II. And it would be hyper-focused on the United States' role. It has to be acknowledged, and certainly for this class, just one second. It has to be acknowledged, and certainly for this class, as we're going to get to talking about the Cold War very soon. Like man for man, the Soviet Union is going to use up more German soldiers and German equipment and German resources than the United States and Britain or any other ally combined. The German army is expending almost everything it's got on the Eastern Front. The vast majority of German soldiers that will die in World War II are dying on the Eastern Front fighting the Soviets, not in North Africa, not in Italy, not in France. All right? And so Joseph Stalin needs that pressure to be relieved, and he hopes that now that the United States is involved, that maybe the pressure can be relieved even sooner. But to his dismay, Britain and America go to North Africa first. We know why. We know why, because North Africa seemed like an easier entry point. But in Stalin's mind, and we already mentioned the paranoia of Joseph Stalin, we talked about the purges of the late 1930s when he got rid of a lot of his officer class because he didn't trust them, and that left the Soviet army so weak in that winter war with Finland, which was why Adolf Hitler thought he could defeat them so quickly. Joseph Stalin is already a little paranoid. Well, here's what he's thinking. Churchill doesn't like me. Churchill doesn't like communists. Churchill doesn't like Nazis. So Churchill is perfectly happy letting communists kill Nazis and Nazis kill communists for as long as that can continue. Because in Stalin's mind, Britain and America are better off if the Soviets and the Germans keep fighting each other to the death. So Stalin thinks there's calculation in this, that the Western Allies are purposely delaying an opening of a Western front. There's a more pragmatic reason, though. Pragmatic? Practical, realistic. There's a more pragmatic reason that the Western Front is not being opened as quickly as Stalin wants. Anybody want to take a stab at the reason why we're delaying this opening of a Western Front? Yes, sir?
Because most of, well, not all, but a ton of our troops are just tied up in Italy fighting Sicily.
Okay. So we are tied up in Italy, but why didn't we open up a Western Front before we even go into Italy? Why did we choose North Africa first? Yes? Could be a better approach, but then we have to tangle with those mountains, sure. What do Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt have to consider that Joseph Stalin never does? The people. They're leaders of democratic states, right? And Stalin doesn't have to concern himself with elections. Churchill and Roosevelt do. November of 1944, Franklin Roosevelt's going to run for president again. So our leader and the British leader, they have to worry about elections. They have to worry about having a population that still supports the war. Now, the American population is like hyper supportive of the war, and so is the British population. Before or at this point in 1943, everybody's supportive of the war. But what could cost support is maybe a disastrous invasion of northern France. So Churchill and Roosevelt feel like they've got one chance, one shot to invade northern France. If they are successful, good. If it fails, it could mean the end of them. It could mean maybe their population will turn on supporting the war. It could mean they wouldn't be able to amass another army big enough to invade northern France and crack the Atlantic Wall. So they have to do it so perfectly and so right that it only is done once, because they might not get that second chance. So timing is everything, location is everything, deception is everything. They are only going to get one shot to go through with this. We have to remember, keep in the back of our minds, did Germany ever invade Britain? No. They were gonna. They tried. They started the Operation Sea Lion with the Battle of Britain, but they failed. And so German ships could never storm the beaches of England. Did Germany ever attack the United States? No. So yes, on the open seas, they're sinking ships, but our territory was safe from Germany. So you could maybe see how the American people and the British people might sour on a war against Germany, especially after seeing a failed invasion that could cost thousands, tens of thousands of American lives that we aren't maybe ready to lose. So a Western Front is going to be slow to evolve. Stalin thinks Churchill's messing with him, Roosevelt's messing with him, because they just want to see dead communists. We have another reason for that. So the next step is going to be from North Africa into Italy. And this is going to come in the summer of 1943. In July of 43, Sicily is invaded. Within the next month, Sicily is taken, and the Allies are now jumping into the mainland peninsula of Italy. As the Allies have made some head ground on Italy, the Italian people and the Italian government turn on Benito Mussolini. And Benito Mussolini will be ousted from power. This is the end of July of 1943. You don't have to remember these specific dates. Just remember, summer of 43, Italy's going to be out of it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the attack in Italy started in September, but they went to Sicily.
They started in July of 43. So in July of 43 they go to Sicily. Within a month they're on the mainland of Italy, and then at the end of July, the Italian government gives a vote of no confidence to Benito Mussolini, and he's ousted from power. Within a couple more months, by September of 1943, Italy officially surrenders from the Second World War. This does not mean fighting is done in Italy and we can pack our bags and go home, because Nazi armies, German armies, are in Italy doing most of the fighting anyway. So Italy surrenders, but now you still have American and British forces fighting Germans in Italy. In October of 1943, Italy will officially join the Allied powers. So they switch sides. Talk about fair weather fans, right? When the war is going well, seemingly for them, they stick on Axis powers. But as the war turns, they hop sides. Now, someone asked a question, and I would ask it of you guys in our last class. Someone asked, why, if Italy was kind of done with the war, why would they so quickly switch sides? Why would they join the Allied powers? Yes, ma'am?
Wouldn't it be like more better for them? Would it be more like, beneficial to them to join the other side?
Yeah, because if you think now the Allies are going to win the war, if the war can come to an end and you have now joined the Allies, you might not face the same kind of punishments you would have faced had you never done that. Yes, sir?
Because there were German armies occupying northern Italy, killing Italian civilians.
Absolutely. And you've got now an occupying German army in Italy that the German people want driven out. So let's help the Allies do that. Yes, ma'am? What's that? By October, they join the Allies. Yep. Yes, ma'am? Yes and no. Italy was originally in World War. The question is, do they do the same thing in World War I? Italy was originally a member of the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria prior to World War I. But the Triple Alliance was a defensive alliance, which said if any of those three countries is attacked, all three of them would join together. But the start of World War I doesn't start with either Austria or Germany being attacked. It starts with Austria attacking Serbia and Germany invading Belgium. So according to their treaty, Italy had no obligation to defend Germany and Austria because they were the aggressors. So they never joined into that war. They never launched their own attack and ultimately would join the Entente powers. Yeah?
The Allies, they had a policy saying that, like, none of them would flip-flop, right, in the war?
The Allies had a policy, or at least this was at the Washington Conference that was agreed to between Britain and the United States, that there would be no separate peace, that you couldn't on your own sign a separate peace. That's what Italy does. Italy signs its own peace. Italy signs a separate peace. But we weren't allowed to do that.
How come the acting powers didn't do something like that?
They might have. They probably did. I don't know. But what do agreements mean to the Axis powers? The Axis powers, Germany had an agreement with the Soviet Union, the non-aggression pact, and that's used for as long as it's used. None of these agreements mean ultimately anything. Countries are always, as we said at the beginning of this class, countries are always acting in their own best interest at the time. Is that what you were going to say? I'm so sorry. Say it now. Okay, don't. Countries are always acting in their own best interest, but you got excited. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I stole your thunder there. Countries are always going to act in their own best interest. And as we see with Italy, Italy's best interest changes from 1939 to 1943. All right. So the fight in Italy is now going to continue even beyond the Italian surrender. But now it's primarily Americans and British in Italy fighting the Nazis in Italy, fighting Germans in Italy. So now the next step is to talk about opening up a true Western Front to make Joseph Stalin happy, right? Yes? Italians are fighting. Italians are fighting, but they're not the main push. Really briefly, and I'm going to talk more about the wartime conferences on another day. But there is going to be a meeting that we need to take note of in November of 43, when all this stuff is shaken down with Italy. In November of 43, what is known as the Big Three of World War II. So we've got Stalin, Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill. And anytime you see a picture of these three guys, you're going to have Franklin Roosevelt in the middle between them, because Stalin and Churchill really don't care much for each other. They're allies, they're not friends. And they're going to meet in Tehran, which is today the capital of Iran. And it's the first meeting of the big three, the first time these three guys, these wartime allies, are going to actually get together and talk. At previous meetings, like in Casablanca, in January of 43, Stalin couldn't get there. Stalin wasn't at the Washington Conference in 1941 and early 42, because Stalin couldn't get there. But now they're all going to get together. And what do you think is on his mind more than anything else in November of 1943? Open up a true Western Front. We're doing it. Give us a break. Do it. We're doing it. We're on it. Relax. But we got to do it right. Tonight I'm going to ask you guys to do a reading called Secrets of Overlord. I'm not going to do a lot of spoilers of what's in there because I think it's really good and I want you to read it fresh. But the planning for Operation Overlord, which is the code name for our D-Day operation, our invasion of northern France, is starting months in advance. So our next topic of conversation is that D-Day invasion. The United States and Britain will appoint this guy Dwight Eisenhower, future President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, as the Supreme Commander of Allied Forces. He's going to be the guy that's in charge of all Allied forces in Europe, and he's the guy that's orchestrating Operation Overlord. Operation Overlord is the totally awesome sounding name for our invasion of northern France. Operation Overlord. So now, yes ma'am. He is the Supreme Allied Commander, and he is the guy that is doing the planning of this invasion. Of course, you guys probably know it's called D-Day today. D-Day, for every military operation, there is a D-Day. That's the day that the operation begins. There's also an H-hour, the hour that it begins. But because this D-Day on June 6, 1944, it's probably not a bad date to remember, on June 6, 1944, because this D-Day was so big and so important for the Second World War, now this D-Day is the D-Day. All right? Prior to this D-Day, you might wonder, what D-Day am I talking about? Am I talking about Operation Torch or Sea Lion or Barbarossa or whatever? Or any other military operation? Now this is the D-Day. Yes? D-Day is the day that the mission is starting, June 6, 1944. The original military planner, he had a little bit of a stutter, so it became D-Day, and H-hour is the hour that we start it. It does not mean doomsday or anything like that, no. I don't know, maybe it was originally Departure Day, I don't even know. It's a D-Day, yes. Overlord, Operation Overlord, yeah. Is that tough enough sounding for you? You like that, don't you? Operation Overlord. And that is the Allied invasion of northern France. The Allied invasion of northern France. Eisenhower gets to lead, not only because he's a tremendous leader and a tremendous general, but also because the majority of the men and the majority of the materials in this invasion are going to be American-made. You will read tonight about the deception that the Allies used to make sure that this plan went off without a hitch. But it did absolutely do just that. June 6th is going to be the day chosen. The weather was poor, and the Germans did not expect an invasion on that day. June 6, 1944. June 6, 1944. On the night before the attack, the Allies are going to send in paratroopers behind the lines of Normandy to secure bridges and roads and intersections and such. They're also going to open up a major bombardment campaign, a bombing campaign over the city of Calais, to give the Germans the impression that an invasion was going to come at Calais rather than anywhere else. Certainly not Normandy, much further to the south. When the invasion comes, it will be the largest amphibious invasion in human history. 7,000 ships were involved, with 4,000 being for personnel, with another 3,000 being for bombardment of the coastline and for supplies. Amphibious invasion. Amphibious invasion. It was said by some observers of the Normandy coast after the invasion, as they were in northern France, that you could just run, just jumping from ship to ship all the way back to England. Now, of course, that's not true. That's a little hyperbole there. But it appeared there were that many ships there. And here's just one grainy image of what it would have looked like after the successful invasion up on the sea there. At 6:30 in the morning, the landings began. 6:30 in the morning, the landings began. We're not going to get deep into the weeds of the specifics of the landings, but the Allies, divided between American, British, and Canadian soldiers, are going to storm 5 beaches in Normandy. You need not memorize the names of the 5 beaches, but you might want to remember Omaha Beach. Omaha was American soldiers, and it proved to be the most difficult and deadly of the beaches being attacked on that morning. 3,000 American troops would fall victim to death or injury within the first few hours of that invasion. Ultimately, the invasion is a success. We can lend that a lot to the great preparation, the time that the Allies took to do it right. Maybe it wouldn't have been a success if Stalin got his way and we rushed into it. You had tremendous leadership from Eisenhower, but also British and Canadian and American forces all working with one common goal under one common voice. We were able to keep the location a secret. This is huge. And as you were going to read tonight, not only could we keep the location a secret, but we had Hitler so convinced that the invasion that happened on June 6th of 44 in Normandy was not the real invasion. That a larger force that really didn't exist, you'll read this tonight, that a larger force led by General Patton, our most feared general, was still waiting and was eventually going to make an invasion probably further to the north. That this was just a diversion. And comically, weeks are going to go by before Adolf Hitler realizes that the invasion he didn't think was the invasion was actually the invasion. So our deception leading into the D-Day invasion was tremendous. The United States and the Allies also enjoyed air superiority at this point of the war. So we didn't have to worry about the same things, for example, that the Germans had to worry about a possible Operation Sea Lion. From Normandy, we now have a foothold in Europe. And now the war is going to change tone. Things haven't been going very well for Nazi Germany to this point. They lost North Africa. They lost Italy. But, and now they're starting to be pushed back by the Soviet Union. But they still had northwest France locked off. Well, now that's gone. And the writing is on the wall by June or July of 1944 that this war is going to be lost by Germany. And now, with a nod to what's going to come to the future, the United States absolutely knows that defeating Germany is not the only consideration we have to have as we bring this war to a conclusion. Because we know that our friends and allies in the Soviet Union are only our allies for as long as the Nazis are there. And they're probably not going to be great friends for much longer either. Because we have deep concerns, even in 1944, deep concerns that whatever territory the Soviet Union liberates from Nazi Germany, that they're not going to leave. And remember, what did Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt work out with the Atlantic Charter? This was not to be a war about territorial acquisition. Stalin wasn't there. Stalin didn't agree to any of that. And we believe that Stalin is going to want some territorial expansion. We believe that that's a part of the communist ethos, that they want to expand. So now that we have our foothold in France, the race is on to Berlin. And who's going to get there first? Is it going to be the Soviets? Is it going to be the Americans and the British? Whoever gets to the capital first. Because if the Soviets get there, the Soviets might dictate the future of what happens to Germany. And we don't want that. So the race is on to Berlin. Yes? they kind of are working together, but countries are driven by their self-interest. And American self-interest and British self-interest is different from Soviet self-interest, right? And we'll talk much more about this. This is the foreshadowing of a Cold War coming. But we have very different perceptions of how the world works, all right? And very different perceptions of what we need to keep ourselves secure, all right? We'll talk about that going forward. Oh, and very excited. I think I mentioned to you in a couple weeks we're going to have a professor from Wayne State coming here. Did I talk about this? Awesome. You can ask him all kinds of questions about the Soviet Union and World War II and the early Cold War or the 1930s. He's going to answer all those questions for you. So now is the race to Berlin. As the British and the Americans begin to push through northern France, Adolf Hitler is being squeezed by the Soviets in the east. The Soviet Union is driving driving German forces further and further to the west from the east. Now, poor Poland. I want to take a note to mention what Poland is going through in this war. September 1st, 1939, Poland gets invaded by Nazi Germany, and then the Soviet Union following, right? And they get divided. This is the partition of Poland. And then on June 21st, 1941, when the Soviet Union is attacked by Nazi Germany, where are those German soldiers marching through first? They're marching through eastern Poland. So the war is once again brought to Poland. And now in 1944 and early 45, as the Soviets are now pushing back, where are they driving German soldiers back through? Right through Poland again. Poland per capita suffers more than any other nation in the war. Upwards of 18% of the Polish population will die in the Second World War. If we were to extrapolate that to our own population today, that would mean about 60 million Americans would be dead if 18% of our population were to die in a war. 60 million people within a 6-year period. I hope we would never experience anything like that. Poland did from 1939 to 1945. So as the Soviets are pushing in from the east, the Germans are pushing in, the Americans and the British are pushing in from the west. Adolf Hitler sees as his last resort, the only way he can possibly hold out in this war, is to break the American and the British lines and to cut off American and British armies from further supply from England. Kind of like another Schlieffen Plan, right? That was the original goal of that Schlieffen Plan. So cut them off, cut those armies off. And this will go down in December of 1944. In December of 1944. In what's known as the Battle of the Ardennes Forest. You've got Belgium, France, Luxembourg here. The Battle of the Ardennes Forest. Where American, and some Brits, but primarily American forces, will be fighting against Germans, and the Germans and Adolf Hitler will throw everything they have, their last tanks, their last reservists, their last airplanes. They will throw it at the American lines in hopes of breaking that line again. If you can break that line, you can cut off any resupply from England. That's the goal. Break that line. And the line, when these final tanks and final planes and final men are thrown at the line will bend, the line will bulge, but the line will never break. So we see here's the front line on like December 20th. Within a few days, it is bent back many miles. This is why the Battle of the Ardennes Forest today, especially by Americans, is known as the Battle of the Bulge. All right. So if you've ever heard Battle of the Bulge, this is the Battle of the Bulge. The line bulged, but it did not break. Legend has it that, and it's true, but we're not 100% sure of what was actually said. A German officer sent terms of surrender to an American general, a guy named McAuliffe, in the area, and McAuliffe gets these terms of surrender, and he reads them, and his reply was nuts. He probably didn't say nuts because guys in World War II were quite fond of the F word, so he probably said something a little bit more colorful there, but he was absolutely not going to surrender, and the Allies didn't, and the Germans, something like that, yeah, and the Germans had expired all of their resources, and they could not continue pushing beyond this line. So the Battle of the Bulge is a success for the Allies. We bent, but we didn't break. It's a defeat for the Germans. So Hitler's final offensive fails. The results of the battle: Germany is effectively done in the war. Hitler used up his last resources, his last planes, his last tanks. But the Battle of the Bulge slows down the Allied advance. Slows down the Allied advance, virtually guaranteeing that the Soviets will get to Berlin first. The Soviets will do just that. By April 25th, 1945, Russian forces will encircle the city of Berlin. April 30th, 1945. On May 2nd, just a couple days later, Berlin will fall to the Soviet army. And on May 5th, German forces in the West will surrender. And the end of the war in Europe is officially declared on May 8th, 1945, in what is known as VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. You guys might have caught something last May because we just had the 70th anniversary of this event. So there were some programs on PBS and whatnot.
Can you go over those dates one more time?
Yeah, they're not crucial. I would never have you memorize such things. But April 25th, the Russian forces encircle Berlin. April 30th, Hitler actually shoots himself. I think I failed to mention that. Hitler's done. May 2nd, Berlin falls to the Soviets. And on May 5th, Germany surrenders. Why do the Allies win? Why does Germany lose? Let's give a couple reasons why the Allies win. That Grand Alliance was a pretty sweet alliance. You've got the most wealthy nation in the world with the ability to produce military resources that is unparalleled. That's us. You've got Britain with the most powerful navy in the world and a tremendous resolve to continue to fight to win. And the Soviet Union had more men they could continue to keep. The Soviet Union is going to suffer tremendous military losses. But because Joseph Stalin doesn't have to worry about popular support, and because Soviet people were generally supportive of the war because the Germans invaded them, the Soviets could continue to throw more and more and more men and women at the fight. And then we've got Hitler's errors. He failed to stop that escape at Dunkirk early in the war. The loss of the Battle of Britain, when Hitler probably would have been better off bombing airfields rather than focusing the target on terror bombing of London, the London Blitz. His three-pronged attack into the Soviet Union earlier than his generals thought he would be ready to do such a thing. His delay in sending forces into Normandy. All of these things will amount to a loss in the Second World War. Allied air power is also crucial to the war effort. The United States' ability to make planes in numbers that no one would have ever imagined before the war started tips the balance of the air war towards the Allies. And those successful D-Day landings. If D-Day wasn't a success, Adolf Hitler would have never devoted all of those resources to defending the West. Yes, ma'am?
What about Japan?
We haven't talked about them yet. We'll get there. That's a whole other day. Yes, ma'am?
But I thought that the U.S. didn't want Stalin to take control of Britain.
We didn't want him to.
But we didn't do it.
We couldn't stop him. We were trying to get there, but he got there first.
It would have been just way too risky to concentrate all of our forces to attack in one direction versus since we went on a broad front.
Yeah. We gave it up. But had the Battle of the Bulge not been a thing, had we not been slowed down so much in the West by Hitler's final offensive, like had Hitler given his final offensive to the East rather than to the West, maybe it would have been different. Yes, sir.
Did Hitler actually fall after like the Battle of Bulge, or was it?
Yeah, Hitler will kill himself right before the end of the war, in April 30th, right before Berlin falls. Yep.